Well, hello, friends. I must admit to you that I failed to record our Thursday evening session in this study on wisdom material in the Bible, and I hate to leave a gap in the series because we're getting close to the end of it. That we really have one more session after this particular one, and so I want to go back and recreate. It'll just be me sharing and talking, not the whole group as we usually have it. But I did want to cover the material, uh, picking up where we had left off. And so I would like to start with reading a section from Proverbs 8 that deals with wisdom quite directly. And so I'll read this and then I'll share my screen and we'll get into this session. So from Proverbs 8, verses 22 through 31. This is wisdom speaking. Wisdom is personified as Lady Wisdom, you might say. The Lord created me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of long ago. Keep in mind, this is poetic language. Ages ago, I was set up at the first before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth. When he had not yet made earth and fields, or the world's first bits of soil. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him like a master worker, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the human race. So, two things about this passage just to get us started. Wisdom is with God the Creator before any of the creation comes into existence. And yet, at the same time, it starts out by saying, the Lord created me at the beginning of his work. So it sounds like wisdom is sort of a separate creation. And here's where I share the screen with you so that we can get to the word in question. And the word here is hypostasis. It's a very technical term in Christian theology, and it's difficult to describe in a precise way. But I'm going to try because it's really, I think, critical to understand what's being said about wisdom. And to prime the pump here a little bit, I want to say wisdom is not something separate from God, like a rule might be. You know, we think about a law that's been crafted and shaped. So we're not talking about wisdom in a sense as something separate. And that's why the word separate from God. And that's why the word hypostasis matters here, even though it's going to be difficult for me to specify and make clear. The word hypostasis is used to describe the reality of a kind of fundamental substance or essence or reality. So it can be used in that way, but typically in Christian theology, it's used more to refer to within that nature, that basic nature, reality, or essence, or substance. Within that substance, there are distinguishable, this is why the word I want to say hypostases. There are distinguishable aspects, and that word sounds a little too impersonal, but I'm going to use it, aspects of this one essence or reality that is God. Now, what I'm driving at here is that wisdom actually is an aspect of God's nature. So when we talk about wisdom writings, we're talking less about God issuing a series of edicts that are kind of out there objectively, and all of us are supposed to read and recognize and follow in a kind of behavioral way. The wisdom as a hypostasis of God has to do more with the very nature of God. Now, this is important because in 1 Corinthians 1, 18 through 25, and particularly in verse 24, we see Christ referred to as the wisdom of God and the power of God. So again, at the risk of repeating over much here, we need to understand that wisdom, as it were, comes from the very nature of God. It's not just God's mind issuing a bunch of statements that are like rules that we're to follow. But wisdom, in that sense, the wisdom of God permeates all of creation. Creation is ordained, it's ordered to follow, to exist by virtue of the wisdom of God. And that Christ is called the wisdom of God and the power of God is an attempt to connect at this deepest level that Christ shares the very nature of God, which is wisdom. It is other things, but it is wisdom. Now we can sort of pull out the wisdom of God and look at it, particularly as we read the Proverbs and other wisdom sayings, including the wisdom sayings of Jesus. So we can look at God's wisdom in a kind of distinguishable way, but it's never separate from God. It is of the essence of God. And I think reading wisdom material in the Bible, it's very important for us to keep that link, that connection between wisdom and God. So not really a creation of God in a literal sense. Some of the early Christological controversies revolved around this very topic and discussions. Not a creation of God in a literal sense, but using that sort of language to get at wisdom was with God from the very beginning and delights in the creation that God has created, including delighting in human beings. So we're getting the sense, what I'm trying to drive at is that meditating, contemplating on these wisdom sayings invites us into a degree of fellowship and probing and searching and thinking and prayerfully trying to imagine how these Proverbs reflect the very nature of God. One more time, I'll say it, beyond just a set of rules that come from God's mind, you might say. All right. So we move on now to a wisdom saying of Jesus, and I invite you to grab a Bible and turn over to Matthew 11, and we'll read this passage. It's really the last verse of the passage that sounds like a wisdom saying. I've been trying to illustrate as we go through this study that there are wisdom sayings attributed to Jesus in the gospel accounts. And I'm inviting us to think about these wisdom sayings as very much similar to the wisdom sayings we find in the Proverbs. And so I've been really emphasizing that there's not an automatic, easy, straight line kind of conclusion. These Proverbs invite us to mull things over, to think about them. We might be troubled sometimes because they seem opaque, they seem twisty to us, right? And so we have to work hard to even get at some basic meaning, and that doesn't always feel good to us. And so, but that's exactly what they're designed to do. And I think Jesus uses this proverbial technique in teaching us something about discipleship. So here we go, Matthew 11, 7 through 19. I want to read the context, even though we're going to focus on the last verse. As they went away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John the Baptist. So the background here is references to John the Baptist. What did you go out into the wilderness to look at? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? Someone dressed in soft robes? Look, those who wear soft robes are in royal palaces. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written. And then he quotes from Malachi chapter 3. See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare the way before you. Truly, I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. Yet the least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has suffered violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John came. And if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. Let anyone with ears listen. Now Jesus makes a turn. So that's the setup for what we get now is Jesus' critique of the religious leaders and anyone who shares this attitude of kind of hardness of heart or disbelief. But to what will I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn. You know how kids can kind of be contrary. So you say yes, I say no, right? That's we played the flute for you. You didn't dance. We wailed. You didn't mourn. So whatever I'm doing, you're doing the opposite. That's a little bit of the background here. Back to Jesus. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. So again, contrary to whatever Jesus and John are doing, they're going to say the opposite. Now Jesus gets to the punchline. Yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. What does he mean by that? He mentions wisdom, and wisdom is vindicated. Well, how? Well, by her deeds. Well, what are the deeds in question here? Well, we could start to imagine deeds in question, the deeds of the religious leaders, the scribes and the Pharisees, their resistance to Jesus. They're looking down their noses at sinners. They're thinking they're righteous according to the law when they're actually breaking the law. Some of the other aspects of the Gospels that we can sort of draw on to fill in what Jesus might be saying. And wisdom, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. Now, what are those deeds that vindicates wisdom? Well, if Christ is the wisdom of God, we might think about how Christ's own deeds, including the big one, his death on the cross, show the wisdom of God. It doesn't look like wisdom on the surface. It looks like foolishness and even wrongdoing, and it looks like weakness and powerlessness. And yet wisdom is vindicated by her deeds. So I think this last statement of Jesus in this context is the sort of wisdom saying that sort of shocks us into thinking, okay, Jesus, what do you mean here? What are you trying to say to us? And then we have to slow down and think and mull over. That's the purpose of wisdom literature. So now we go back to Proverbs chapter 8, and we're going to focus here on some themes in Proverbs 8. And in the group, I invited people to add to this list, and you may want to do that too. Add to your list as you read through Proverbs chapter 8. You can see some themes are repeated and they're sort of spread out. Now, we won't read the whole chapter in this video, but you can pull out your Bible and read that whole chapter. And I'll just hit the high spots now for this moment. So, oh, I'm sorry, not chapter 8. Forgive me. The study was chapter 20. So we're going to go to chapter 20 and look at these verses in chapter 20. Forgive the confusion there. As usual, I get myself confused. All right. Some of the major themes or repeated themes in Proverbs chapter 20. There are references to kings. We see in verse 2, the dread anger of a king is like the growling of a lion. Anyone who provokes him to anger forfeits life itself. This is not an admonition. It's not advice. It's not an ethical instruction. It's actually a description of reality, you might say, where kings have power and they, the metaphor here of the lion, kings, when they're exercising their power, maybe should be feared. And then look at verse 8. A king who sits on the throne of judgment winnows all evil with his eyes. Now that's an interesting one. If the king is winnowing evil with his eyes, is that a positive or a negative? You could say the king is winnowing evil. He's sorting out evil. And yet with his eyes, we might think the king is winnowing evil with his eyes is a kind of surface level point of view, not really going as deep as it could. So this proverb might have a kind of ambiguous or ambivalent, two-sided meaning, and we are to think about both of them. And then in verse 26, more about the kings. A wise king winnows the wicked and drives the wheel over them. So you see the repetition of the word winnows there, and that would slow us down and cause us to think. And then 28, loyalty and faithfulness preserve the king, and his throne is upheld by righteousness. So we have a king theme, and they're scattered throughout the chapter. And I asked the group, is it just a sort of random collection of lists that we're looking at here? A random collection of sayings, and the compilers of these sayings didn't bother to kind of put them and group them together according to theme? Or is there some reason that they're scattered out and we read about kings and then we go on, we read about other topics and then we come back to kings? Again, I think it's worth our pondering whether or not Proverbs, in its structure, in the way it is laid out on the page, as it were, also might contribute to the thought-provoking intent. False weights and measures, this seems pretty straightforward. The Lord considers false weights and measures an abomination. Then there are verses about body parts, about the eye and the ear, and you can look at those verses. Let me focus in on self-awareness or understanding. We'll just do a couple of these and then we'll move on. So you can read through Proverbs 20 and make your list of themes that you see repeated. Proverbs 20, verse 5. The purposes in the human mind are like deep water, but the intelligent will draw them out. Now, in the New Revised Standard that I'm using, it uses the contrastive, but. The purposes in the human mind are like deep water, but, or by contrast, or on the contrary, the intelligent, the wise, will draw them out. I'll leave that sit for a moment. Now look at verse 9. Who can say, I have made my heart clean, I am pure from my sin? Here's a rhetorical question. Nobody can really make our own hearts clean. We need help making our hearts clean. Seems to be the suggestion of that rhetorical question. And then verse 24. All our steps are ordered by the Lord. How then can we understand our own ways? I don't know about you, but this strikes me as deep wisdom, because we really don't understand our own ways sometimes. Do you ever find yourself saying, why in the world did I do that? Or what was I thinking? That sort of thing. The mystery of the human heart is revealed here. And then finally, verse 27. The human spirit is the lamp of the Lord, searching every inmost part. Again, I'm inviting you to think, what are the shades of meaning? What are the facets? We read these Proverbs, we turn them just a little bit, we reread them, we think through them again from a different angle. And here in verse 27, I think, first of all, we see that our spirit, our breath, our life comes from the Lord, and the Lord, through that life, searches every part of us. So I think we are, again, there's no kind of conclusive, definitive, this is the final answer sort of answer here. But I think this verse, like the others, shows us that it's part of God's desire and design for us to search these questions, which includes searching our own hearts. And remember back to the point about wisdom as a hypostasis of God, Christ as the wisdom of God, that we're being invited, we're being called, we're being challenged to enter into a realm of contemplation that puts us in touch with God's very nature. And that can be very joyful. It might be intimidating. It's certainly awe-inspiring, but that's the kind of God we worship is drawing us into this level of fellowship with God. And the wisdom sayings can help us move into that realm, that dimension. So I asked, do you see others here? And my question about random collection, or is this somehow purposeful? Those are things you can think about and sort out yourself. Well, I've talked through these points. I gave these other translations that we used in a class, and it is helpful to use more than one translation when you're really studying. So I use the New Revised Standard, which I've quoted, which I've read. The Common English Bible says, advice comes from the deep waters of the heart. Those with understanding can draw it out. So you don't see the contrastive there. So how does the Common English Bible look at this? And then Robert Alter is an expert in language, and he's done a lot of translations from the Hebrew, and he has a book on the wisdom materials in the Bible, and so I've drawn from him too. And you can see how he translates this verse: deep waters, the counsel in a man's heart, but a man of discernment draws them out. Now, what Alter tries to do is he tries to make the English sound and feel a little bit more like it is actually in the Hebrew. So if I use voice inflection here a little bit, deep waters the counsel in a man's heart, but a man of discernment draws them up. Again, we need help discerning our hearts, and wise people can help pull out of us what is in our hearts. Now, we joked in the group session about deep waters, the counsel in a man's heart sounds a little bit like Yoda, and I think that's that's not a bad kind of analogy there. Okay, same with 20 verse 14. Bad, bad, says the borrower. I didn't talk about this earlier, but we did talk about this in our group. Bad, bad, says the buyer, then goes away and boasts. That's the New Revised Standard. And you can see the other two versions there. And you can see the shades of meaning, the differences. And we talked about this, what is a buyer doing when the buyer says bad, and we talked about bargaining, how it's easy for someone who's kind of a horse trader to really to talk down the product that they want to have. They actually value the product very much, but they're going to make it sound like it's not very good because they want to go for the lowest price possible. And then they go away and they brag about how great they are at bargaining. Well, again, that can cut both ways. It may be true that some people are really good at bargaining like that, but they're probably not going to brag about it because they don't want to out themselves about how good they are at bargaining in that kind of trade negotiation. So again, the proverb invites us to sort of go at least two directions as we think about what the saying is telling us. All right. I also touched on this one, so I won't repeat what I've said, but you can see again the variations in wording by using different versions. And I am inviting you to use at least 2 or 3 versions when you're really studying something. You don't have to take the whole chapter. You might just take a few verses and work through 2 or 3 different versions so that you can see these differences. Especially with wisdom sayings, I think that's a valuable practice to include because it gives us time to slow down and notice a shade of meaning, notice the tension in a statement, notice details that if we're just kind of breezing through a passage the way we would a narrative, a story, even there are lots of details we should notice, but still, a narrative is easier to read. These sayings really challenge us to slow down. It's not always easy or comfortable reading. And so I invite you to take 2 or 3 versions, take a few verses at a time, and obviously do one at a time, and just go slowly and take your time and think through things. Now, this was for the class, but you will see if you watch these videos in sequence that our final study about wisdom literature, we're going to go to some wisdom psalms in these three, 19, 73, and 91. Not all the psalms are wisdom material. They're hymns and songs for worship, but a few of the psalms actually touch on the themes of wisdom and are meant to evoke similar kinds of reflection like the wisdom sayings do. So again, I'm feeling a little sheepish for forgetting to turn on my recording when I was doing this for our group, but this, at least doing it this way, allows us to keep things in sequence and it doesn't make a gap. And so if you watch this video, I hope you find it helpful. And I commend you to read wisdom material in the Bible. Read the Proverbs, read them slowly, read them thoughtfully, read them prayerfully. There's no hurry, there's no haste. Let's let the wisdom of God speak to our souls so that we can flourish and thrive as we grow toward maturity in Christ. God bless you.